I want to just review what we've been discussing in the last two classes. People still have a question about the construction of the reform line of the priests. And I think a lot of that problem stems from a misunderstanding of the reform line of the 144,000. So part of that problem has been because we've taught that the close of probation is the Sunday law, and when you do that, you end up having a reform line that ends here at the Sunday law, and we've called this the line of Adventism. What did we do then after we'd say this was the line of Adventism? Because we know this is not a complete reform line. What do we then do? No, because it's not long enough.
Yeah, the world.
You'd have to end up saying the world, and it's the world that would enable us to extend this to either the second coming, but more often than not, we'd go to the close of probation. One of those two. They're not the same event. It'd be one of those two. So we'd use this concept of first the church, then the world, to construct a line. And hopefully you can see when you start doing that, you end up coming to wrong conclusions. We can see that because we'd say everything's finished here, and then everything's going to start here. And this concept of first the church, then the world, while it has a truth to it, it's correct, but it's not really correct if you think about it. What's a substitute for world, we could say? We could say Babylon. We could say maybe the kingdom of Satan. Now, if we're going to use the argument that this is the kingdom of heaven and this is the kingdom of Satan, what's the qualification for entering into heaven? How do you get into heaven? Just simple Adventist teaching. What do you have to? We have spoken about it.
In Christ Jesus.
Sorry?
In Christ Jesus.
You have to believe in Jesus. And once you do that, your name gets written into a book. The book of life. Yeah? So, if we were to use this model, first the church, then the world, only those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life enter into the judgment, the sanctuary judgment, if I can use that kind of concept. Would everybody agree with that? Yeah? And if you're a Gentile, are you even allowed to participate in that ceremony or that feast, that festival? You're not even allowed to enter into it. So your default position is essentially death, because you can't participate in the work of God. Are we okay at that level? Yeah? So if we were going to think about it like that, first the church, then the world, this idea about the world that we normally think is called Edom, and Ammon, or the Nethinims, all of that, I've already shown that this is really who? God's people, isn't it? Yeah? So we're saying, before the executive judgment comes, we want to call you to join us. Maybe they've just been sitting on the sideline. Even if you don't think they're in the world, just think they've been standing around doing nothing. So if we could conceptualize they're on the sideline, standing around doing nothing, what story is that? Which doesn't have a spin that there's some kind of separate organisation that you're pulling them out of. What story does that remind you of? Sorry?
Story of the 11th hour.
The story of the 11th hour workers. It's right here, the 11th hour workers. What is the story of the 11th hour workers? It's a benign story. Every worker is in the same position, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're all sitting on the sideline. Then this farmer comes and starts picking these people up one after another until you get to the 11th hour workers, because they really weren't participating in the work of God. And where is the work of God happening? In this farmer's field. It's in a field. It's always about a field. So even all of this that we call the world, what really is that? Who's the focus of attention? It's not the world, is it? Because it's God's people. It's the church still. So the story from here to here is a story about what group of people? The church. It's all about the church. So when we do first the church, then the world, when does the church's story actually end? Sorry? Right here, isn't it? And even beyond, if you like. So first it's the church. It takes you all the way, not to the Sunday law really, to the second advent. So when we talk about the world, when is the world going to be dealt with? We spoke about it yesterday.
In the same time with the church, technically. That's how the parable teaches. When they're going to receive their payment.
You've got to speak up.
Yeah, in the same time as the church, if you look at the parable,
Which parable?
the 11th hour workers.
The 11th hour workers are God's people. This is the church. It's not the world.
Okay. Oh, okay.
If you're going to say the 11th hour workers are the world,
Yeah,
what was the first hour workers?
Yeah.
Because they were standing next to each other in that marketplace. They're all the same pool of people. When is the world going to get dealt with? In 1,000 years. And they come to the executive judgment at the end of that 1,000 years. So,
We don't have a message for the world.
yes, you're about to die. Sorry. What message have we got to them? We're not even speaking to them. Are we? What are you saying to the world?
Judgment's coming.
No, you're saying that to these people. Come out of her, my
Who
people.
is the world?
Sorry?
Who is the world? Someone that is not in any church?
It's just this nebulous concept, and there are people in there, and you say to those people who are God's people, come out of her and come and join us. I understand the point you're making. I'm not arguing that we don't have a message for the world. I just want us to view things from a slightly different perspective, because I want us to see how we have developed our logic to truncate a reform line. Yeah? So I'm not saying it's wrong, first the church, then the world. You know, Alan White's going to teach us that. It's based upon the 2300 days. What is the 2300 day prophecy about? No, it's not about God's people.
Jews and Gentiles.
Yeah, but what's the theme? Rebuilding the temple. It's about, I'm going to say it's about judgment. You could go to Isaiah 28:17. Judgment will I lay to the line. What happens at the end of the 2300 days? Judgment. What happens at the beginning of the 2300 days? It's judgment. It's all about judgment all the way through. So the 2300 days is neatly divided into two parts. 457, 1844, and what would this one be? This would be 34. This is 490 years, and this is 1,810 years. So this is where we get this concept of the church and the world. Ellen White's quite straight about this. Once the work of the gospel has gone to the church and it's completed its work, then it's the time for the Gentiles. So it uses the word Gentiles. So here's the world and then the church. So this idea of first the church then the world is quite strong. You'll notice that Sister Tess, when she did that line of the counterfeit yesterday, or the Catholic Church, you can see how they're having to deal with their own church before they go to the world. It's there. I'm not trying to say that this is wrong, but what I am saying is it leads you into truncating reform lines. And I think this is conceptually why we've struggled with this line here, taking it all the way to the end, and understanding that this harvest, this binding off, is actually for the 144,000, not for the world. This is not the world's binding off. It is in the sense of these two groups, but it is not in the sense of the Nethinims, which is what we normally consider the world. Have I confused anybody on that? Or have I made it better or worse? Sister Bronwyn?
No. We don't go to the world with our message. We go to God's people. That's what I got out of what you said.
Okay. So can you see how this logic ends up truncating our reform line? That this harvest is for God's people, the 144,000. It's not for the world in the sense of this world. It's what's left of that field, which is all those people, which are just going to be burnt up. And if we were to do that, the world's judgment happens during 1,000 years. I've seen your hand. During 1,000 years, and then the lake of fire. It's all there, but it's really a foregone conclusion. They're not going to say, let's see if you had your sins forgiven, what your good deeds and bad deeds were. It's just, how long is their punishment? There's no hope for the world in the millennium judgment here, the 1,000-year judgment. It's automatic death sentence. All that we're working out is how long they're going to be punished for, what their punishment is. We've already spoken about the intricacies of that yesterday, so I don't want to go back and deal with that. We're also impacted by that. I'll just say at that level. It has an effect upon us. So when we think about the church and the world, and we'll bring it back to this scale, we have to be careful how we analyse that, and not to be sucked into this trap to say that the story has ended here. Because we're so familiar with that, then people ask, well, what about this? How do we deal with this problem? So I'm just explaining why we get into this problem, or why I think some of us do. That we need to juggle these concepts and be sure that this idea, first the church then the world, is correct. It's an internal work, then an external work. So in the church, this church that is in what condition? It's under sin. Romans 3:9. It's in the Laodicean condition. You go to this church and you say, you workers there, whatever workers you are, first hour workers, 11th hour workers, you need to come out and do some work. So if we want to use the concept of the 11th hour workers for Adventism, could we do that? Can we take that parable and say there are 11th hour workers in our church? We can, because Ellen White does that. Ellen White uses the concept of the 11th hour workers to say we need to get ready because things are about to happen, and all you lazy people out there, get on board in the church. This is the lazy people in the church, get on board to work. And that's exactly, if I'm going to redraw this, this is the line of the priest. This cry here would be for the 11th hour workers in our church to say, you need to start working. We don't call them 11th hour workers, we call them, or I'm calling them not the Levites. I'm saying these are the priests in this story here.
You just said,
1 second. I'll go on what have I said wrong, if I've corrected me.
you just had the loud cry in the line of the priest are for the priest.
Here.
Yeah, Sabbath.
The last of the priests.
Who are they for? Well, okay, hold that question for a moment. We'll come to Sister Tamina, then Brother Philip.
church and the world and two ways of looking at it, and when do we use which one?
Sorry?
When do we use which one?
I don't know, it depends what your story is. Depends on the point you want to make. All I want us to see is what my problem is, that I speak to you or you speak to me, or I get an idea that you're misunderstanding things. Maybe I'm misunderstanding things. The movement doesn't have a clarity on what's being taught when we draw all of these lines. And I'm trying to understand how comes you and I are adrift in our thinking. Where's it gone wrong? Either it hasn't been taught well, or I've made a mistake, or you've made a mistake, and you don't seem to get what's being said. So I'm trying to second guess, because if I asked you, what's the problem? You'd probably say, I don't know it well enough. I think Sister Karen said, I don't know the thing well enough to even ask a question. And I think that's more true than people realise, because I can empathise with that. If I don't understand things properly, I'm thinking, I don't even know what question to ask. So when you're not asking me questions, I'm trying to guess what's gone wrong between us. So this is my best guess of what's gone wrong, because I'm trying to think how we taught the message, what's gone wrong in my thinking, and how my thinking has changed. And I think in this context, at this scale, and I keep on going back to this scale because this has to be our reference point. And I'm saying it's our reference point, not because I like it to be, is because this reference point was taken not from a Spirit of Prophecy quote in the singular, but from the book, The Great Controversy, that I'm going to say simplistically begins in 1798, goes to the Second Advent, has the close of probation, the Sunday Law, and 1844. And from that line, and Ellen White gives us all of these, every single one of those 5 waymarks, and those 5 waymarks are in 4 dispensations. The 4 dispensations are the one that's at the top of the line. All we've done is we've taken out that, we've taken out these 2, and we've called them 1989 and 9/11, developing this line. So this is straight from the Spirit of Prophecy. And I'm suggesting that once we understand what she says, then we can go about making some kind of application to explain what we want to say. I've seen your hand as well, Bratido. So I'm saying all of this has been given to us. We didn't develop this. So why do we struggle with this? And that's what I'm trying to explain. So I've had a few hands up, Brother Philip and Brother Theodore, I think.
So the line that you have drawn there, you say...
This one here?
The big one, the 144K.
Okay.
I guess, no, I see the big line, and from what I understand is that this big line includes all the 3 little lines that we, like this, all the 3 little lines that we have, added together, make this big one, if I'm kind of right.
Yes.
I know it's not technically added together, but in a sense, it's composed of these priests, Levites, 11th hour workers, you know. So then the thing that confuses a bit for me is, why do you call it the line of the 144,000? I mean,
I'm open to correction. What line would you like to give it? What name?
I don't know.
I've given it 3 here.
I guess I don't have any. You could name it whatever you want, but
the why question? What name?
Yeah.
You've got to say you're objecting to 144,000, even in a mild way. What would you? Why does that cause you problems? Why ask that? Why make that comment?
Because we say that 144,000 are the priests, and the line of the priests is different than this line, and that's why it's a bit confusing to me. But it's okay.
Okay, so last week you called it the line of the priests and the Levites. Last week, last year, whatever. Yeah, you agree with that?
This big line. or
You said the 144,000 are composed of priests and Levites.
Yes.
You said that.
yeah.
So why is that concept easier to swallow or better than my concept of just a priest? Why were you satisfied with that? Because if I said it was a priest and Levite, that wouldn't change. How would it change in your mind?
Shouldn't it be like, because if we say the 144,000 are only the priests, okay, but there are another three groups which
Okay,
are not 144,000 but which are included in this line.
No, the 144,000 are priests and Levites. Okay?
Okay.
So why are you happy now?
No, because where are the Nethinims? The Nethinims are also in this line.
Okay, so you were never happy with it then, or you just didn't realise you weren't happy?
I never called this line the line of 144,000.
Okay, what would you call it?
I don't I don't want to use the word the world, you know, the line of the world, but some kind of general line which includes the line of the last generation, probably.
Okay, so I got that there.
Oh, final generation.
Final
yeah.
generation.
But I'm not sure.
Okay, so let me ask you a question then. The priests and the Levites equal the 144,000. You okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, and then you've got the Nethinims, which are not the 144,000.
That's how I knew.
Okay, so you're okay with that?
Yeah.
So then you don't understand what this is, how this works. I'm not saying right this second, but I'm going through a logic. You don't understand what this is showing because you've got to do that and that.
Yeah, I think it's showing the combined lines of all three of them.
I understand that.
Yeah.
So then you tell me give me the line of the 144,000 according to that definition. All I want is the start and the end. According to this definition, it's just you're going to combine the priests and the Levites is 140,000. Where does the line of those people begin?
Oh, 1989.
Okay. Where does it end?
So Panium would be the close of probation for the next.
You can't think this week. You've got to think last week.
Okay.
If you can go back into your thinking.
Oh yeah. Classically, I would think it ends at the Sunday law.
Sunday law. Okay, this is the 144,000.
Yeah.
Then the Nethinims.
It would end at the close of probation. That's my classical view.
Okay, so you remember I did COP and then I said second advent because people are going to give a slightly different answer. I had it the other way round. Okay, so the Nethinims, you take them out of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've just put on the board what I just rubbed off.
Yeah.
So this is the thinking that we have. This is the very thing that you're saying. Okay, we could kind of say this is a combining of all those three groups, but it doesn't quite work, and you don't know why we call it this, because it doesn't seem to quite fit. But I'm saying, well, let's go back to the original, which is that, and that's exactly what I said. That I'm not saying just you, but generally, that this is what you think. This is how you've created this line. And this is why we're struggling to do this. I'm not saying you're struggling with it right now. I'm saying you probably got it. But this is exactly... So that was interesting that he just took me in his thinking and it leads to exactly the same place where I think most of us are struggling to conceptualize this one and tuck it into our existing thinking. Sister Squetta, did you have your hand up? You didn't. Brother Theodore.
Well, my thinking wasn't that at all. So I looked at it in my understanding, we had northern Israel, which had been scattered.
So I'm going to try and draw this as you speak.
So northern Israel had been scattered. And there was an attempt to gather them in Millerite history. And northern Israel is, in Millerite history, Protestantism. And then Protestantism fell and became part of Babylon. So they never got really called out of Babylon. They had this period of time in which they were given the gospel, but then they went back to Babylon. So they would be typified by the scattering of literal northern Israel into Babylon. Then in our history, when the second horn of Protestantism falls, when the image of the beast is formed, then those people that's symbolized by northern Israel that are scattered in Babylon, they would join with Seventh-day Adventists before the Sunday law to present a message to the world. So I had another group of people that is not Israelites, that's not the church, because to me, the Nethinims are the church. So this other group of people would be those that aren't Protestants, that aren't part of that apostate Protestantism. They would be Catholics, they would be Sikhs, Hindu, Buddhists, atheists, all different types of people that then would have an opportunity. So I would look at the world as a fourth group that then, in my thinking, you're sort of applying that to the Nethinims. So I had 4 different groups.
And today?
Well, I haven't decided. But
Okay,
I
so you
would
still
then,
think maybe your that position still might be correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't seen a reason why it's not correct, though I'm considering what you're saying. So when I would look at that whole line that you call the line of the 144,000, I would have called that the line of the world. And I would see some of the things that you're bringing up, I would fit into what I understand already. It wouldn't really contradict it. It wouldn't undo my view that I had.
Brother Bob. Oh, did anybody want to make a comment on what Brother Theodore said? Did they understand what he said? Okay, so this is a bad diagram of what he just said. You had the separation of the 12 tribes. The 10 tribes are scattered into the world, into Babylon, and there's an attempt for unification in the Millerite history. It doesn't work, so this unification happens in our history. And this unification of the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes happens before the Sunday law. So tell me if I'm explaining it wrong. So this is the Nethinims, and this is, I'll just call it priests and Levites in the terminology that we're using. So the 2 sticks, Ezekiel 37 language, are going to be joined together. Once they're unified as this good fighting force, the 12, then we're going to go to the world at the Sunday law and and say to the world, all you Catholics and spiritualists or whatever religion you are, now you can come and join us, which then would be a 4th group, which would be the world. That's what is that fair representation of what you said? And from what we've discussed, you're still open to that possibility that it may be correct.
I would say that some of these illustrations are dealing just with the church, and they're not really addressing the world. They're not addressing that 4th group at all.
Did you have your comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, you did. So, Sister Bronwyn, I know you want to ask another one. Sister Bronwyn, then Brother Graham.
2 things. Once I heard you say the joining of the 2 sticks before the Sunday law, and that strikes me as like not what we've taught, but I couldn't prove why. And then the other thing is what I'm hearing you say is the Bible and the message and everything, it isn't for the world. It's for God's people. That's who it's all for. So it's really never even about the world, even though in a general sense, it's just not. It's all God's people that are in the world.
So
I never thought of that before.
So the way you've expressed it, I've led you in that direction, and I would defend that and say yes. I'm not arguing the point that if you weren't born an Adventist, just with this exclusive group, the rest of us were all in the world. And someone went to the world and gave a message to the world and said, why don't you come out of that world and come into the church? So people would conceptualize that it's a message for worldlings or for Gentiles. So I understand that concept, but I just want us to see this same story from another perspective. And all we're saying is, remember early writings, another illustration. So I just want to borrow language from there. There's these people, and I'm going to do it in the imagery of stalks, and one of them has got light, and they're all bound together. And all we're doing is we're going to that company, and we're just talking to this person here. We're not talking to the rest of them. We're just saying, why don't you come and join us? I understand the story develops later on and says all the others have an opportunity. But in that scenario, we're assuming that all of those have got some kind of light that's on them, that now they're available. So I only want to show us this thing just from a different perspective, because it helps to explain to me why our thinking is being challenged when we do this first the church, then the world. And I'm saying it's not that, it's the church all the way through. Then the world will be dealt with in a totally different way. So I'm not trying to argue this or say this is wrong. I'm just trying to say to look at it in a different way. Brother Graham.
My line of thought was similar to Sister Bronwyn in Brother Theodore's already used the priests and the Levites and the Nethinim titles. Where would he gain the other title that fits the Catholics and the Sikh and the other people that he listed coming out after the Sunday law?
Okay, so I don't mind having some comments on it, but I didn't want to sort of redirect the class to sort of critique Brother Theodore's theory. I don't mind talking about it a bit, but I don't want to go there and say, and to demonstrate either why he's right or why he's wrong, because I want to go in a different direction, because he may be right, or you might have strong feelings that he's wrong and you want to show him why he's wrong. Brother Bob.
A couple of comments. The first one is
Before you comment, what are you going to be talking about, Brother Theodore, or just a general comment?
about how we named the big line.
Okay, so it's a general comment, okay.
Okay. First of all, when you look at the big line, it has to be just talking about God's church, in period. And by the time you get to the end, the only ones that are left standing are the 144,000. But it's God's church. That's my first point. And then my second point is when it comes to looking at who's the church and who's the world, from my perspective, at one point, every single one of us, I don't care whether you're born into an Adventist family or not, we're all born in the world. We're all born in Satan's camp. And at some point, we have to, by the truth being presented to us, we have to make a decision to come out from Satan and his camp and come into God's church. Those are my points.
That last point, that we're all born in the world, born in sin, and we have to come out of that, is a general concept, a general idea about, just in the concept to say steps to Christ. We're all in a lost condition, and individually we must receive the gospel and be saved. And we need to be able to take that model, which is the thing that undergirds all Christianity, really. It's the principle that every single one of us is dealt with on an individual basis with God. We're not saved in masses, we're saved individually. We have to take those models and apply them at this corporate level, if you like, or this prophetic level, and make sense of that. And I think sometimes we're not very good at that, about jumping between two different models and explaining them. But once you get the hang of it, things, I think, begin to make sense, hopefully. Brother Tyler, sorry.
What problem do you think that we're solving by seeing the distinction of the church going all the way through. Because like you were saying before, you see that there is some validity. It may be misleading at some level, but there is some validity in saying church in the world. But you obviously have something that we're solving by doing this. Is it the Sunday law close of probation issue?
It's connected to the Sunday law close of probation issue. This is not the close of probation because the story hasn't ended, but I'm trying to give a defense to explain what this history here, Jacob's time of trouble, is, who it's for. It's not for the world, it's for this group of people who went through this experience, and this experience is connected to this one, and this one's connected to this one. If you remember, I did yesterday that waymarks are just like needles, and you have to run a thread through them. And the thread that's being run through here helps you to remain focused that you're only talking about one group of people. And this thinking leads you into the idea that you're talking about two groups of people. And if you've got two groups, then this group's work is finished here, where this group's work starts. There may be some overlap, I'm not arguing that, but essentially it's first this one, then this one. And it's this concept that's made us struggle to bring the 144,000 harvest here, and because we're now saying that the priest and the 144,000 are the same entity, and I've done that in the framework of creating this line, people are struggling with that. And I'm saying, well, how come you didn't struggle before when it was priests and Levites? The reason they didn't struggle before is because they didn't have this problem here. They would say priests and Levites are here in this part of the story, and we already taught the close of probation is at Sunday law, so it all fitted, it all worked, and then you go to the world. So that's why I'm saying that this idea of this is the church all the way through is what's being demonstrated here, and it's being demonstrated through this idea of having a story that runs through. We've got to come to a place, if you want to develop a line or a theory, those waymarks, you have to connect them. And we're not good at connecting 1989 and 9/11. How do you connect those two separate things? How do you connect Russia with Islam? Because there's no connection between them. We just said this happened, then this happened. And it's a really, it limits us in our ability to, I think, enter into an experience that actually makes any sense. So I'm just going to answer that in a really simple way. This is in Acts of the Apostles, I can't remember the page, but it's to do with the wind that Paul's going to face on his journey to Rome. And Sister Tess brought this point up twice, where she says, first there's a south wind, and the south wind tells you. When that happens, it's not like there's something that's going to happen. When you hit that, south wind hits you, you know it's a warning that the east is about to come. So just at that simple level, you get that south and then east. So that's what I want. That's the point I want us to see. It's not just that this isn't close probation and this is. It's to introduce why there's this harvest, and it's throwing us into confusion, because they say, well, how do you get close probation before? So I've got lots of hands up, Sister Tess, and then I've forgotten other ones. I'll do Sister Tamina. No, then Brother Theod, and then Sister Tamina.
Tyler kind of asked the same question I wanted to ask, but I've lost what we're doing and why we can't say church then the world.
We can.
So there's no problem with that?
No,
what problem are we seeing that we need to clarify that?
Because our concept of what it says, the world, I think can sometimes be misleading. We could say there's an internal work and then there's an external work. We're going to go to God's church, or no, God's people who are in the fold, but He's got many sheep that are not in the fold. They're not of this fold, they're of another fold. And all those sheep have to come into this fold. I'm just saying that if you track the sheep are not the goats. This is a story about sheep all the way through, some of this fold, some of another fold. There's another story that you can do, first the church, then the world. And it's this one that we focus on so much. But all I'm showing is that there's a different way of looking at this whole problem, that this is not about the world, this is about God's people in two different camps. One in this locality, which we call Adventism, and one in another locality, which we call the world. And we're pulling them out of both camps. It's not to disparage any other models or any other ways or any other concepts that people are having, but it's to show that there is validity to create this line, and this line is about God's people, because this is the story of the kingdom of heaven. It's not the story about the enemy and his seed sowing. This is the story about the good man and his seed sowing. Their interference here, when the enemy comes in, is just noise. It's just a nuisance. The purpose of this story was to sow seed, to get a harvest, to feed people for some benefit that brings you all the way down to here. The story of the tares, of Satan's work in all of this, is a distraction at that level. That's what I'm saying, because this is the story of the church, the kingdom of heaven. So when we do church in the world, this is not the story that's being developed with this theme. This is all about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven doesn't stop here. The kingdom of heaven goes all the way to the end. What's been overlaid on top of that is the story of these tares. Now you can develop a totally different story and use this church and world scenario. And if you took all of that out and you just did the 2300 days, 490, 18, 10, you get a hard close of probation here. There's no more sin offerings that can be done in AD 34 for God's people. Then the gospel is going to be taken to someone else, another target audience. But that other target audience really are God's people that are being fished out of the world. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question.
I still don't know why.
Why?
Why we're doing this.
Because people are asking me, how do you get a harvest for God's people here? When we've taught that the priests and the Levites finish all their work here, they're done and dusted. And I'm saying the work is not done and dusted. If you need to still want to call them priests and Levites, if we said that their work is done and dusted here, but this model doesn't teach that. This model teaches their work is finished here. I'm saying no, there's a work that needs to be completed here for these people. That's the point I'm trying to explain. Brother Theodore.
So I think you're correct that we need to sort out our lines and our terminology, just like we were getting our waymarks were confusing, making the Sunday law a close of probation, even though the Sunday law doesn't have that characteristics as a symbol, we gave it those characteristics. That we have these different storylines, but we're mixing them up. Because even with the different parables dealing with seed sowing, they're not necessarily telling the same storyline. And when you look at the top line of the harvest, you have this field, which is the world, even in the parable of the wheat and the tares, but a seed is planted, which is God's church on the bigger scale. It's not really even talking about the individual. It's talking about the church. And so that harvest is the harvest at the end of the world of all God's people. It can't be one group of people. Now, then when you say that...
Let me just stop that one point there. So here, we did say this, that this harvest is not just of the 144,000, they're the first fruit, and then you get the general harvest, but it's all tucked into here. So that, I think that's in agreement with what you said.
So when we have the 144,000, we know that there is a group of people that are alive when Jesus returns. They're the 144,000. And so they are harvested, but their harvest results in this bigger harvest, because in my understanding, the 144,000 are the first fruits. And everybody else is dependent upon their success if they're going to be resurrected and be
Amen.
part of God's kingdom. So that would explain how this whole line relates to the world. But what you're dealing with in this harvest is different than the harvest that happens with the priests and the Levites and the Nethinims. It's not the same event.
Say that last bit again, please.
So the harvest that happens with the priests, they're binding off, and then the Levites and the Nethinims, that's not the same event, obviously, as the harvest that happens at the end of the world. So how is that related to that harvest? Like, they're all harvests, they all have a line, but they're not the same event. And I think that's part of the problem that we're having, is trying to understand that. Because we know that the actual harvest, if we want to call it the actual one, is, that kingdom being made up. It ends with the second coming of Christ and with the resurrection of God's people from all ages.
So your question, it's framed in the imagery of harvest, and I'm saying the problem's bigger than that, because we could ask the same thing about the Sunday law. We have verse 41 here. So how do you, if that's the Sunday law, how do we get here, and you can't even see it, some event that we call Sunday law, then another event that we call Sunday law, then another event that we call Sunday law? How do all these become Sunday laws when that's verse 41?
Because they have the same characteristics.
So it's about this idea of characteristics and structures. And people who have left the movement think we've just gone into cloud cuckoo land doing all of this, because all of this is being constructed not through spirit of prophecy quotes. They're being constructed by lines. And for all those gainsayers, the people who think we're mad, ask yourself this question. This period here, Ellen White's quite strong in her language that by the time you get to the Sunday law, if you haven't prepared, you're not going to make it through this. Whatever preparation is, I'll say steps to Christ type of preparation. If your life is not in order, you're not going to make it through here. She's quite adamant about that. And then this one, she says this is a preparation to enter into this one, into this history. But this one sort of seems like quite sort of like a breeze. The Holy Spirit just comes down, the angels come, we join them, and this is the work of preparation. It all looks sort of easy. So this, I'm saying this is easy to enter into this one. I might even say a foregone conclusion, if I can express it that way. I'm not saying this is not going to be a horrible time period. But the way I see it is, she doesn't say, in this time period, unless you're really, really good, you're not going to enter into this history. It almost seems like a foregone conclusion. But when you see the relationship between this history and this one, her language is different. She's quite pointed in her language and says, you people, us, you're in a mess, and you're living a delusionary life that if you think this period here is going to, you can live in a way that's not right, and it'll all get sorted out here, this is against God's will. It's not His design. And we can use a simple argument. If you remember that I did a diagram that looked like this. If you remember, and then I did something like this. And I had two titles. One was Rain and one was Second Angel. So if this is the history of Christ, and this is the history of the 144,000, I'm saying it's a repeating pattern, if you would call fractals. Here, you've got two outpourings of rain. There's two outpourings of rain, and there's two outpourings of rain. Rain 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. This is Pentecost. This is Resurrection Day. What's the purpose of this reign? Because they've all been in the upper room for 10 days prior to this. Their lives are now in order. Just at a corporate level, everything has been fixed. And once this reign comes, then the reign is going to be used for public evangelism. It's not for correcting your differences. So if you take that argument and bring it into here, the work of the latter rain here is not to correct your character. That needs to happen here. This one is for public evangelism. Once you've entered into this, it's kind of like plain sailing. The angels come down, they give you the power to do this work. Remember, all 12 are doing this work in this history at Pentecost. There's not some kind of only 11 of them doing it and one of them is lazy. They're all joining in. It's not about them, it's about the work that they're going to do for others. So this important history here, which we have truncated and we've made it 9/11, what waymark is this one that Ellen White would tell us? It's 1844. From 1844 to the Sunday Law, this is the former reign. And she said, we need to get our lives in order, all of this history, in preparation for the Sunday Law. I'm arguing that that's the judgment of the living. All we've done is said, okay, that's fine at this large level, but we're interested in our own history. How does it work for us? And so we come to 1989, 9/11. So for those people who are arguing with us and telling us that we don't know what we're talking about, this history here, which is basically a blank space, do you think that to get from here to here, all you need to do is read Steps to Christ and be nice in your family and nice to one another? Do you really think that's all it's going to take? Because if that's true, then you don't need to be concerned about the events that are happening in the world. And the problem with that line of thinking is, why would you start your story here? Because this story here wasn't created by some experience that you had in a devotional book written by Ellen White. We started this story here by an external event which we found in inspiration. And then this one was found by an external event that was found in inspiration. So this history here is being created by external events. And what is the Sunday Law if not an external event? It's not you're going to wake up one day and open your Bible to a certain verse and say, I had this really great experience with God now. It doesn't work that way. It's external events that are controlling and directing, manipulating our experience with God, with one another. So I'm saying this whole thing is being bookended by two external events. And we're going to develop an argument that in between here, there's no external events going on. I mean, it's not logical. So all we're doing, you know, in this movement's make-believe world, is we're saying, you know what, we'll just come up with some external events. We'll choose to call them Sunday laws because we like that kind of language. You can call them what you want. Don't call this Sunday law. That's a bad language. Let's call it CA. Let's call it InfoWars. Let's call it something else. And let's not call that Sunday law. What we'll call that is a battle in 217 BC, and we'll call that Raphia. And then we'll call that Panium. So we don't want to use that term if you find it offensive. We'll use different terms. Are those better for you? You find them more palatable. And if you do, that's fine. But the problem is, what do those events mean to you? What impact are they having? Just like what impact did this event have upon you? And we teach, I don't know what the gainsayers teach, that at 9/11, the impact that it has upon you is that you come alive. You have an experience because you're dead here and then you become alive. When I say you, I'm talking about you this corporate body, because we can take this on an individual level. So all we're doing is marking external events that begin to impact us. And if you've walked away from this message because you don't like Sunday laws, then what you're saying is you have a blank space here. And if you have a blank space, you don't know how to prepare for this event, because this event is not some one-on-one experience that you're going to have with God. It's an external event that's going to impact you at a personal level. And that's all this movement is teaching. It's filling in the gaps here. And it's filling the gaps in a very specific way. And the question is, well, why do we pick these three and not other ones? You can pick whatever you want, can't you? There's hundreds of battles. How do you pick which one? So I'm not saying they're the only battles, because you could put other battles, overlay them. But if those are the three battles, how do we know where to place them and what they mean to us? How would we do that? How would you know what the battles mean? I would suggest, oh yes, because I'm not asking rhetorically.
Previous histories that line up with your history.
Okay, so it's previous histories that line up with our history. So here's the previous histories, and my question is the lining up. What mechanism or what tool are you going to use for lining up? And I'm saying there's various ways to do this, but we'll just do this one. We'll use this one to do the lining up for us. And you, whoever you are, you may agree or disagree with the details of the lining up, but do you actually disagree of the principle that you want to see what events are bringing you to the Sunday law, some historical events, and you want to line them up? The way you're going to line them up is with a template. So I'm going to use this template, but this template has been overlaid on this template, or this line. And this line I didn't create. This is a Spirit of Prophecy line. If you buy into these two, even if you bought them that these are types, even if you said they're types, that's a separate argument. You still accept that they exist. So if you've bought into this, then all you need to do is say, what do these mean to us? And if you're going to use line upon line, then you want to see these waymarks that we've got, which ones are these ones picking up? And all we're saying is, it's picking up a Sunday law. It's highlighting this one here, those three events. And as soon as you do that, then you're forced to do what we were forced to do back here. If you remember, we went to 2 Chronicles, first we went to Ezra, and then we went to 2 Chronicles. So what did we do here? I'm not looking for the dates. What did we do here? Sorry? We created two groups. So we had created the group of the priests and the Levites, and then we said, okay, we've got the priests here, and all we've got is blank space. We need to populate that. We need to create something that's meaningful, because there's no point in having this blank space. If you have a blank space, you don't have road marks or waymarks to get you from here to here. You're going to get lost on your journey. So these signposts keep you on the right track. And the right track, it says 200 miles, 150 miles. You can see the thread. What's the thread that takes you all the way here? It's the distance. 200 miles, 150 miles, 100 miles, 10 miles. You can see how that thread works. So all we're doing is taking this blank space, populating it with external events, which are historical ones, and then we're trying to say, well, let's put them into a framework, and without explaining how we've done that, all I'm saying is we've taken this hook and hooked it here. But as soon as you do it for one, then you have to say, well, this is not some isolated event. It's just an event in a thread. Once you have that, then all we're doing, so this is sort of going to get a bit small, if that's the Sunday law, it's connected to a line of history. And this one is connected to a line of history, and so is this one. And this line of history is this very one here, which is, I'll put time of the end, we could call it 1989, and I'll put that one, which would be Second Advent. And we'll do the same for this one and the same for this one. So for those people who say fractals are rubbish, they don't work, they don't make any sense, the question is, how do you get from here to here? And I don't think they have the ability to do that anymore. And so you have to end up switching to a message, a devotional message, to say that we need to be ready every day. And so this is the steps that you lead yourself into, and you go and, I'm going to say you fall into the wicked world below, into that ditch that we spoke about, because you're blind. And when you're blind, you can't see these waymarks that take you from this event to this event. So this is the logic that Brother Theodore was talking about, if I understood him correctly, about these harvests. So all I did was just pick up provocative one, the Sunday law. Because everyone knows there's only one Sunday law, and we're saying there's multiple Sunday laws. And then they say, show us the Sunday law in 2014. And we say, we're not very good at that. It's these waymarks that we're trying to pick up that lead us to this. Brother Clayton.
You said earlier, before you start this, you said that if you're not prepared by the Sunday law, that you couldn't make it through the loud cry. Did you not say that?
Yes.
I mean, okay. If that's the case, then what hope do I have if the Sunday law was in 14?
So this is a question that comes up over and over again. When you take that model and you say there's no hope.
I didn't say, I asked.
No, I understand. The elephant in the room, the pregnant thought there is, there's no hope after 2014. I didn't say that, I said it on that scale, and you've brought it into this one, and you say the logical conclusion is that. So I understand that point, and let me answer it this way. I don't have a good answer, okay? I don't have a good answer.
Should I just leave right now?
We could all join you. We could all join you. So let me try and do it this way. This is 1844, and I'm going to say this is close of probation, Second Advent. But I want to take these two and collapse them into a singular point, if you're willing to let me do that. The binding off is a singular point, COP, Second Advent. Okay, what is that history in terms of Daniel 8? Judgment in the sanctuary, in respect to the feast days. Okay, so this is the Day of Atonement. And how long is that? It's 1 day. So if we go to Daniel 8, and we go to verse 26, I'm suggesting that that's what's being addressed here. Verse 26, and the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Wherefore, shut up the vision, for it shall be for many days. It says a vision that deals with the morning and the evening. I'm saying that's in the singular. There's one morning, one evening, and it's this one here, this one day. Now, if you were an Israelite and you go back to ancient Israel, I'll just call this 364 days, and this is 1 day, which is a year. So in this period here, if you sin, you take your sacrifice and you go to the sanctuary and it gets dealt with. So all your sins been dealt with, and it goes onto the curtain, and then you come to the Day of Atonement. Now in the Day of Atonement, at the beginning of the day, they kind of had this preparatory work which puts all sin away. So here, there's no sin. And in this day, no one's allowed to do any sin. All that's going to happen is sin is going to be eradicated from the sanctuary, showing the completion of the work of sin. So this no sin happens here. This is in an individual real life person. No one's allowed to sin in that history. And so this history here is the blotting out of sin. It gets taken off the curtain, all that sin that was sprinkled there, all gets sorted out. Then it gets transferred in this portion where he comes out of the sanctuary, he puts his hand upon the scapegoat, and then he gets taken away. So that's how it works in the real world, in the real ancient world. How does it work in our real world? From 1844 to this history, because here you are, at the very end, you were born, and you have sinned. How is that sin going to be dealt with where the ministration is no longer in the holy place, it's in the most holy place? How's the sin problem going to get dealt with? Because you're not allowed to do sin, it's all meant to be blotted out. So the problem is, in real life, it's not this simplistic. Christ is sort of got one foot in the holy place and one foot in the most holy place. And if we're not careful, our whole message sort of spirals out of control. This is one of the arguments that evangelical Christianity has to us, is, well, if you're going to take this literally, that means since 1844 Adventists should never have sinned. And we say, well, let's get real. And then they say, well, we've got you now, because if you want to talk about let's get real, it's Adventists that are living in a delusionary world, and they're living in the real world, because there is no sanctuary in heaven. There is none of this paraphernalia. It's all just make-believe, because Christ doesn't operate like that. And besides, he's going to intercede for us until we get new bodies, because we can't stop doing sin. So they have a comprehensive message that is logical. Our one, it has some logic, but it's sort of pretty illogical, really, because it's based upon this idea that Christ is ministering in the holy place and in the most holy place at the same time. So there's this problem. So all I'm saying is, if you can take that concept and you bring it into this story, that, remember, even though we've targeted this, this is still former reign history. And in the former reign, you're supposed to be getting your life in order. So I do understand the concept and the concern that people have, that in this history here, when it gets brought back to here, there are problems. Now, I don't want to back out of the idea, because the next question I'm going to get asked is that if I change that from Sunday laws to close of probations, or let's go back to the harvest models, is that close of probation real? I think it really is real. I think we need to get our lives in order. So that's my best argument about that. And people are going to say, well, that's not a very good argument. And I understand that it's not that straightforward, that we are struggling. But we do have prophetic arguments, especially if you go into the book of Zechariah and Haggai, that in the history of where the temple's been rebuilt, you do have this imagery about a rebuke to God's people, that in that history, which is the history that we're talking about, this history here, that people don't have their lives in order, and it's their last opportunity to do that. Sister Tamina.
I wonder if the answer to that dilemma would be that when we draw the lines up there, that we always or mostly speak more or less about a corporate, and everyone has also its individual line.
Yes, and that causes us problems as well when we try to go from those different scales. So who has their hand up? Brother Theodore.
You bring up an interesting point, because one thing I've noticed with people who reject this message is that they're really attacking Adventism, and they often don't realize it, that they're using the same arguments that Christianity is used against Adventism. And Christianity, when attacking Adventism, are actually attacking Christianity. And it goes all the way back. You can't. This message is a logical progression of the Bible. And you can't ignore it. It has to be the reality that God is going to be giving us a message that's going to be present truth, that's going to be built upon the foundation of the past. And you can't live in the past. The past keeps moving forward to the present. I don't know, it's kind of maybe nebulous, but I think you know what I mean.
I don't want to make it appear that, we just make things up on the fly and we don't have a firm basis for doing what we do. Tucked behind all of these waymarks, there are very strong and powerful arguments. There are Spirit of Prophecy quotes. How we apply those quotes help us to generate these models here. For those people who think that we've left inspiration and now the lines are the ones that are that we bow down to, those kind of arguments are fallacious arguments. That they're not true. And what you said, Brother Theodore, it reminds me of the idea that once you leave the Spirit of Prophecy, you'll end up rejecting the Bible. And that's what people are really doing. You reject Spirit of Prophecy, you reject the Bible. You reject these thoughts. You're actually rejecting Adventism because we're not teaching anything different from Adventism. All we're doing is bringing Adventism to a logical conclusion. And these things that are threatening people about these waymarks here are just an explanation of how you get from here to here. If we think everything just gets finished at this last moment, that concept is just not in agreement with the Spirit of Prophecy. It really is not. Sister Tamina.
Can I ask my question from beforehand?
Yeah, go ahead. Please.
I understand what we're doing with the church and the world, and it's all the way the church through. My question is, how can we explain then when we go to Revelation and the 144,000 are made up and you see all the tribes and Israel is the church, how can we then say the 144,000 are only the priests and do not include the Levites, neither the Nethinims? When we say, oh, it's all the church, but we just take the priest as the 144,000.
Oh, I thought you were going to answer the question.
No, I asked before the same thing.
Oh, Brother Daniel's going to answer it.
I will add to that question.
Sorry, you asked that?
No, I'm going to add to that.
Add to the question.
Yeah, because in that line, if you're saying it's the 144,000, you have a blue guy there and a black guy there in the harvest. Yeah? Okay, so can we say that's the wise and the foolish? Because if we say it's the wise and the foolish, the wise are the 144,000, and the foolish are who are they? The Levites, the Nethinims.
Brother.
I was just gonna ask, can either she or you restate her question? I didn't hear it quite well. Can you, if you want to say it again?
You're good.
I'm going to summarize. I think she's asking, Revelation 7, it says the 144,000 are made up of all of those tribes. How comes we're saying that the 144,000 are only priests, not priests, Levites, and Nethinims? The whole package.
Yeah, when we say the entire line is the church.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, that's my
I understand the logic that they are the priests, but if you go to that line.
Oh, explain the logic then, because she doesn't understand that logic.
So if you go to Noah, there are 8 people and more people that build the ark, and I think they are represented by the 144,000, the priest, and you have the clean and unclean animal that you can symbolize by Levites, and the unclean by the Nethinims, because they came afterwards. So you have the priests building the ark, they are the one that build, and you have the Levites and Nethinims, which are animals. Like Peter, he says should come down from heaven. That's the symbol of the Gentiles, so you can say that's the Nethinims. So they're not people, they are animals in that parable. So that's how I see. And if you go to Revelation 7, You see the 144,000, there are 12 tribes. And you know that the number 12, they're not applied for the Levites, they're applied just for the priests. So that's how I see that. But one logic, at least two logics I see for that. But the problem is with this, because if you're saying, okay, the wise are the 144,000, who are the foolish?
At what scale?
In the line of the 144,000.
The world.
Of the world. And where are the Levites in that line? Who are they?
They're not there.
Oh, they're not there. Okay. Because it seems like if you're not 144,000, that line, you're foolish. That's what it seems like.
Is that a problem?
That's why we need to tell that the
Is that a
Levites had to
problem?
die before.
Is that a problem? You disagree with that, or?
No. It's because it seems like you are just saved if you are 144,000. That's what it seems like.
Is that a problem?
Yeah, because the Levites are saved. And they're not 144,000.
The Levites aren't on that story.
Okay. They died? Is that what it means?
They're just not on.
Even whatever happens, it's not a story about Levites. It's a story about the 144,000. I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. Why does that cause you problems?
Because it seems, that's the point, it seems like I'm living there, let's say I'm a Levite, and I'm there, Daniel 12:1, I'm here, okay.
So just so that it's clear, you're not a Levite here. Because it's not a story about Levites.
Okay.
It's a story about 144,000. This is a symbol. The Levites is a symbol of an experience of a certain group of people, a certain class of people. And you could run their story through, and then you could talk about them. But that's not that story. So
I don't know if I answered her question. You can try. Did I? You should, yeah, you should answer her question.
let me just add one more point to this discussion about priests and Levites, I guess. And I want to use it in the framework of Brother Daniel. So when you have Noah's Ark and you have good and bad people building this ark, and they're building this ark hard up to the animals coming, if we're okay with that. And I'm suggesting, if you want to do that, this would be 2014, if you want to sort of consider it that way, or the midnight cry, and then these animals come on. So there's these good and bad people that are coming on here, and then these animals. That's what you're saying? And what was the point that you're making from that?
That the priest, they are the one that build the ark.
Okay.
The good ones, let's say like this.
But the bad ones didn't?
Yeah, they're foolish
Yeah,
priests, yeah.
Okay.
And you have the animals, and if you can use Peter when he see the sheep coming with unclean animals, we say that's the Gentiles.
Okay.
So I'm saying the unclean one are the Gentiles, or the Levite, or the Nethinims, and you have cleansed animals that I would say are the Levites.
Okay. Anyone else got a point or a comment? Oh, Sister Tess, sorry. Oh, who else?
Right.
Okay.
Two questions. The animals don't get on at 2014. That was my first problem. And the second one is I still have a problem saying that is the line of the 144,000.
Which one?
The big line.
What do you want to call it?
Well, the final generation. Was,
I've got Final Generation here.
but you've got 144,000 all the way along harvest.
Okay. You're happy that there's a biblical term called 144,000?
Uh-huh.
where do you want to start and end them? Like this?
No.
Where would you begin and end them?
I get that they're in that story, I just don't think it is their story. I don't see how that can be.
What's the purpose of a reform line?
Prepare people?
Which people?
Everyone?
So you can do an everyone story, but an everyone story is also God's people story.
Okay.
So why can't I run a narrative here that says this is a story about God's people? You could do a narrative of the world if you wanted to.
144,000 is a specific group inside God's people.
And if we're targeting that specific group, where would they begin and end their story?
They're part of that, but I just don't see that as being the main theme.
So you're not able to answer my question where you begin and end the story of the 144,000, even if it's a subset.
If they're priests, Raphael, Panning.
You wouldn't begin their story. No. I'm asking the symbology that you see in the scriptures where the 144,000 are being dealt with, based upon the things that we know. Where would you begin and end their story?
On that line.
So you'd end it here.
Yeah.
So you're in agreement with what I've done, but then you're saying you're not in agreement.
Because we're making that the line of the 144,000, like that's the... If they're priests, I don't see that as really being for them, they're just part of it.
I'm saying they're not priests. Priests are not 144,000, 144,000 are not priests. They're two separate entities.
Okay. I don't get that then.
Because they're symbols. They're symbols of an
the same thing.
Sorry?
Symbols of the same thing.
They might be symbols of the same thing, but they're still symbols. And the symbol of the 144,000 takes you all the way from here to here. You've agreed with that. So if you agree with that, why do you object to calling that the line of the 144,000 if you've got the beginning and the ending? Why would you object to that concept?
Because I don't think they're the main theme, and I still don't get how we make two symbols, two separate reform lines for the same group of people.
Well, there's 2 points there. First one you said is they're not the main theme. I'm saying they're the theme that I want to choose. I want to choose to make them the main theme of my study. And you wouldn't object to that, would you? Because you could come up and do a study and say, my theme is the world. You could have the same waymarks, but you wouldn't be talking about the world. So you wouldn't be talking about 144,000. These preparation and form arranger, you'd have to target them to the world then. That's how I'm approaching it. I don't know if you're conceptually, would you approach it differently?
For me, that Sunday law isn't for them, that latter rain isn't for them, the midnight cry isn't for them.
So this latter rain is not for the 144,000?
Not mainly.
So when we went to Early Writings 277, and she said this is God's people, and it's to prepare them for the hour of temptation, that them is not God's people. I'm not arguing if they're a subset. I'm saying whoever God's people are in this history is to prepare them for that. It's God's people that are being prepared by the rain. It's not some other group. It's God's people. That's just a straight Spirit of Prophecy quote. I don't know if you... Is that how you read that Spirit of Prophecy quote? Because we can read it.
I don't understand.
The Spirit of Prophecy quote?
No, the line.
Okay, so let's just go to the Spirit of Prophecy quote. I don't want to open it up because we've read this so many times. It says in this history, she doesn't target that there's a Sunday law. She identifies it as angels coming down, and she says all of this experience is to prepare you for this. Is that a fair reading of that passage? Because you know the passage reasonably well. Who's being prepared for this in that story? The church. So I'm going to call it God's people, if you're okay. I don't mind calling it the church. And this experience is the latter rain. So God's people are receiving the rain to prepare them for this. That's what I've done here. But you're saying, no, the latter rain is not for God's people, it's for someone else. But the passage says it's for them. This rain is being poured upon them to prepare them for this event. It's not being poured upon the world to prepare them for this. This is for the church. This is a story for the church. That's why I called it Adventism, because it's the church.
So final generation, Adventism, 144,000 are not the same thing.
For me,
Three different ways of looking at that line.
for me, they're synonymous terms. At this scale, I don't mind. You could, whatever term you want to use, you can call it SDAs, Adventist, final generation. I'm happy with any of those terms because they all explain the same thing. That there's a group of people on planet Earth that begin a story here at 1989 and they're going to navigate all the way through to here and they're going to leave planet Earth here. And I'm saying you can call them the final generation, or you can call them the church, or you can call them the 144,000. And you agree that this way mark and this way mark bookend this symbol that's used in the scriptures. I think you've agreed with that. And you say that the latter rain is not primarily for the church, for this group of people, and I'm saying it is. That Spirit Prophecy quote is, to me at least, reasonably clear, which is why I went there to put that into our memory banks so that when we would address this, it would be clear. So I'm saying that rain is for the church, it's not for the world. It's primarily for them to prepare them for this. Now there's another layer that if you go to Matthew 13, the tares are receiving the same rain and they're being matured in the same way. But that rain, it can be poured upon the good and the bad. It was never designed to take care of tares. Those servants are being paid to look after tares. The tares are collateral damage. They're a nuisance there. They shouldn't be part of that story. You can run a story that talks about how the world starts off here and how they're going to be developed. I'm not arguing that, but I'm saying, to me, a reform line is about the church. It's a religious movement of what the church is going to do and the experience that it goes through. Construction, the only thing that gets constructed, I'll say it in that simple way, is a temple. It's a sanctuary. If you went to the story of marriage, it's the church preparing herself to meet the bridegroom, Matthew 25. It's not about the world, it's about the church. We'll stop here. I know people still got questions. We're over time. We'll carry on this afternoon. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness, your mercy. We want to ask and pray for a blessing. Lord, as we individually and as a corporate body grapple with these lines, we want to ask that you would guide, direct us and bless us, that we might be found faithful and true. We ask for a special blessing upon the food that we're to eat this morning, and we ask, Lord, that you would protect us and keep us safe through this day. We ask and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.